Hello hockey fans, and welcome to part 2 of our look at the great career of the Big M, Frank Mahovlich. If you haven't watched part 1, which covers his first 7 seasons in Toronto, you can click the link at the top right corner of the video screen, and the link is also in the description, and if you haven't already checked it out, look at it right now. But for those who have, here is a quick recap. As with the last video, Frank Mahovlich's rise as a star in Toronto came with great success, but also with great scrutiny from the media, and the vast majority of it was undeserved for our hero, and also from some of the fans too, also very much undeserved. He has now played 7 professional seasons in the NHL with all the Toronto Maple Leafs. When he joined the team, they were going nowhere. After winning the NHL's Rookie of the Year, Frank helped the Leafs make back-to-back Cup finals with a great sophomore year, but a somewhat lackluster 3rd season. Fans were already starting to turn against him, not seeing the quote, big deal about this guy. But he made it known in the 4th season that he is truly beyond the hype, setting franchise record for goals and points in the season in 1960-61, getting rousing ovations for great performances, only to be booed when he fell 2 goals short of reaching 50 on the year. The Leafs were upset in the playoffs, and Frank took flack from the vicious Toronto media once again. However, in 1961-62, he was still a machine, and helped lead the Leafs to a Stanley Cup victory. The following season, he had an incredible year once again. Didn't play overly stellar in the playoffs, playing hurt, and Leaf fans thanked him by booing him, but they won another Stanley Cup. And then when we left off, Frank's stats went down just a little bit, but he's still one of the best in the league and played incredible in the playoffs to help the Leafs win 2 thrilling 7-game series to win the Stanley Cup. So now, after 7 seasons, Frank has played in 5 Stanley Cup finals and is now the recipient of 3 Cups in a row. He's been a first-team All-Star twice, second-team All-Star twice. He has gotten votes for the Hart Trophy. He's been in the top 5 in league scoring 3 times. He has led the league in even strength and game-winning goals, and when he hasn't, he's been in the top 10. Even made the top 10 in power play goals a couple times. Frank was truly a star, and at 26 years old, still has a lot to offer. But it won't come easy. Going into the 1964-65 season, there was plenty of reason to believe the Leafs could make it 4 straight Stanley Cups. The team was still led by the man who was the guiding force behind their turnaround in the late 50s, head coach/general manager, Punch Imlach. And Frank again was still young, as was Dave Keon, who had emerged as a superstar. Team captain George Armstrong still proved to be a great leader. Red Kelly, the one-star defenseman turned forward in Toronto, was the man Frank was clicking with the most. They now had former Rangers megastar Andy Bathgate, who was able to achieve his first Cup victory last year. You had the multitasking Bob Pulford still on the club, also Don McKenney, the ever-popular Eddie Shack, veterans Ron Stewart, Billy Harris were also in tow and contributing. Dickie Moore, the Habs legend who initially retired in 1963, signed with the Leafs for this season. And youngsters such as Jim Pappen, as well as rookies Pete Stemkowski and Ron Ellis complete this team on forwards. And the defense, the tough no-nonsense Tim Horton, the hard-working Carl Brewer, the courageous Bob Bond, grizzled veteran Alan Stanley, and the dependable Kent Douglas. In net, they still had the ageless Johnny Bower, but the biggest offseason acquisition in the NHL that entire season, as the Detroit Red Wings decided Roger Crozier was the future in net, the Leafs grabbed Terry Sawchuk. Yes, the Leafs now had the most dangerous goaltending duo in the league, as many teams were now adopting the 2 goaltender system. The Leafs had 2 future Hall of Famers in net, while both getting older, still capable of doing damage. Speaking of older, that's what a lot of people were actually starting to notice a bit about the Maple Leafs. They were getting older, but many felt that would play to their advantage due to all the playoff experience they have. But Frank's relationship with Punch Imlach was not getting much better. Now, Imlach always rode Mahovlich hard, and that was just a coaching style back in the original 6 days. But facing pressure from fans and media, he was getting to the point of tyranny, and publicly criticizing him at times, even deliberately getting his name wrong to wind him up. The relationship had not been the same since Mahovlich's 1962 training camp pulled out for a better contract. Frank's mental health issues had held up despite all the BS he had to deal with, being a whipping boy for the entire town it seemed, the media, the fans, his own coach, despite the fact he was, again, one of the best players in the league. But either way, here we go, as Frank Mahovlich plays his 8th season, beginning with playing in his 6th straight NHL All-Star game and assisted on a tying goal as he and Bathgate set up Kent Douglas for a goal, but the Leafs would lose the All-Star game to the NHL All-Stars 3-2. And Frank was off to an excellent start. 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points in 8 games in October. 2 goals and an assist for 3 points in a win over the lowly Bruins, and 2 weeks later on Halloween, he gave the Hawks a good scare with another 3 points, a goal and 2 apples, 5-1 dominant win and the Leafs are looking pretty good to start the season. In November, however, the Leafs began to look a little sluggish, but nothing that would be cause for alarm, at least so it seemed. And Frank was again scapegoated by the media, and the fans were continuing to show their ungratefulness and punch him like God in the case of his star forward, centering him out above the other stars on the team who weren't exactly performing up to par most nights. On November 11th, Frank notched an assist in a win over the Detroit Red Wings at home. But a day later, he was checked into a Toronto hospital, citing constant fatigue, but was diagnosed by doctors with acute depression. And to be fair to the fans of Toronto, they did show support for Frank while he was away. It was clear that Imlach's tyranny, however, was getting much worse. Frank was very much down, but not out. After missing 11 games, his return took place on December 9th and lost to Montreal, where he went pointless, but still got a standing ovation from Leafs fans at the Gardens. The very next game against the Boston Bruins at home was being broadcast on Hockey Night in Canada on December 12, 1964. 4:22 into the game, Mahovlich perfectly set up George Armstrong for a goal to make it 1-0. Armstrong then returned the favor as Frank found his spot and scores! 2-0 Toronto after 1. And they led 3-1 after 2. John Busick cut the lead to 3-2. Just under 2 minutes later, Bathgate gives it to Armstrong. And Frank has he scores! Second goal of the game, leading 5-2 in the third, but then Mahovlich got it to Bathgate, who set up Billy Harris. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points, 6-3 win, including the game-winning goal, and was named the first star of the game, and a tremendous adulation from the Maple Leaf fans, who looked like at long last they were truly, fully appreciating what they had. And he did so on the TV stage. It's like he was never gone. He had 9 points in 9 games in December. But the Leafs as a whole were playing okay at best. In January, Frank had a 10 points in 15 games, including 1 goal and 3 assists for a huge 4-point night on the road against the New York Rangers, and scored a game winner against Boston to end the month as well, and the Leafs were improving. Frank stepped up a little more in February with 11 points in 11 games. He had a goal and a helper, the former being the game winner in a tight win over Chicago, 2 assists in a dominant win over the Montreal Canadiens, and then had a goal and a helper again against Chicago in a win. The Leafs began to struggle a bit in late February and won just 5 of 12 games in March. Frank still played well, however, 9 points in those 12 games, and had a goal and 2 assists for 3 points in a 10-1 throttling of the Rangers. Frank helped the Leafs in a comeback win against Montreal with a tying goal, and the Leafs would finish the season 30 wins, 26 losses, and 14 ties for 74 points, a notch down from the year prior, and finished in 4th place, clinching the final spot for the postseason, but well ahead of the 5th place Rangers, so they were really in no danger. But regardless, they are still the 3-time defending Stanley Cup champions, and now it's playoff time. And for the 3rd straight year, they will counter their hated rivals, the Montreal Canadiens, in the semifinal series. And they've beaten them in both seasons, first in a 5-game dominant win in '63 and in the thrilling 7-game series last year. The Leafs are putting their string of 3 Cup championships on the line against a team that is always consistently a contender, and this year they finished 36 wins, 23 losses, and 11 ties for 83 points, 2nd place in the NHL. Toe Blake is still the man behind the bench for the Habs. He is eager to dethrone the Leafs and embark on a new Habs dynasty. The Leafs went 5-6-3 against the Montreal Canadiens, almost even, but not quite. But either way, this could go either side, as Montreal does have that stacked team, but the Leafs do have the momentum of championship success, and they will defend that title the best way they can. Jean Beliveau still leads the team as captain and is still relied on to make big plays. 20 goals, 23 assists for 43 points. His numbers were down significantly, but he did battle some injury issues this season. He played in his 10th NHL All-Star game, however, and is still regarded as the elite among the league. Also, Henri Richard was still producing for the Habs, as well as one of their stars in their 50s dynasty. But Claude Provost emerged as a surprising scoring star, as he is no stranger to scoring goals, granted, but is known more for his checking abilities. But he was the Habs' top scorer that year, 27 goals, 37 assists for 64 points. He garnered his first ever first All-Star team selection and came in 5th for Lady Byng Trophy voting. Also other talents up front included Bobby Rousseau, Ralph Backstrom, Dave Ballin, John Ferguson, Claude LaRose lent a big hand, and former longtime Leaf Dick Duff was now a Hab too. On defense, Jacques Laperriere continues to thrive as one of the best in the NHL, as he was a runner-up for the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman, and was a first-team All-Star. Also, J.C. Tremblay was still playing outstanding hockey, and he too got some votes for the Norris. Also, you had the talented veteran Jean-Guy Talbot, as well as reliable Terry Harper and Ted Harris rounding out this core. In net, Charlie Hodge had another great year, 26 wins, 2.55 goals against average, and a 905 save percentage. He was a second-team All-Star for the second straight year, but the Habs, like other teams, were now utilizing a two-goaltender system, and the man who was their backup had already been a star in the NHL for many years. Gump Worsley, who spent many years trying to help carry a mediocre Rangers team, now plays for the Habs. Gumper's numbers were okay. It was his .906 save percentage that stood out above the other statistics, but he was still regarded as a great goaltender. So, here we go. Game 1 at the Montreal Forum, the Habs led 2-0 after 2 periods, but former Canadian star Dickie Moore and Carl Brewer tie it, only for Russo's power play winner and Hodges goaltending to steal the win for the Habs. Frank played okay in this outing. Game 2, the Leafs are shooting everything they've got at Hodge, but they can't solve the goalie and trail 1-0 in the second. However, Frank gets the puck to Stemkowski, who gets it to Ellis. He shoots, he scores! And the Leafs tie the game. But that's as good as it would get. They would lose 3-1, and they now trail 2-0 heading home to Toronto. Game 3 at the Gardens, Frank is hustling out there as Gumper and Bauer are putting on a veteran goaltending clinic. The Habs led 1-0 after the first and 1-1 after 2, however. The Habs took a 2-1 lead with under a minute into the third period. And the Leafs pressed until Andy Bathgate tied it. We go to overtime, and Dave Keon is the hero. The Leafs are still in this thing. Game 4 does not look good early on. The Habs led 2-0 after the first period, but then power play. Frank, he sees the situation and sees Tim Horton as wide open as an old-fashioned plane. He sees Red Kelly is at the correct spot, and Kelly scores! And the Leafs are in the game and take the momentum into the third as goals by Ellis, Armstrong, and Kelly give the Leafs a 4-2 win and tie the series 2-2. Their dynasty is far from over. Game 5 back in Montreal. Frank plays a lackluster outing. Habs take it 3-1 on the strength of Gumper's goaltending, and then the Leafs dynasty is on the verge of being derailed. But they were in this situation last year as well, with both the Habs in the semis and the Wings in the finals. And here we go. Game 6. It's looking good early, as the Leafs scored 2 goals 1 minute of Hart, just 3:11 into the game, and led 2-0. The Habs scored 22 seconds later, but then 17 seconds later, Stemkowski to Mahovlich to Ronnie Ellis. The Leafs led 3-1 after 1. After that, the Habs were playing a much tighter game and putting more pressure on. A goal by LaPerriere in the second and Russo in the third would ultimately send this game to overtime. And the excitement of the extra frame was there, and Claude Provo would end the Leafs season and their string of championships. Frank played okay in this series, but took flack for not playing up to his usual standard. He had 3 assists and was an unofficial +1, but regardless, it didn't matter. The Habs would go on to beat Chicago in 7 games to win the Cup, and you can definitely be certain Old Man Imlach won't be pleased with this. Frank Mahovlich had 23 goals, 28 assists for 51 points in 59 games. Frank wasn't put together all that much with Red Kelly this season, but the two were still good when shifted together. But Andy Bathgate, the former Rangers star who came to Toronto last season, Bathgate set up 8 of Frank's 23 goals, just over a third, and the two collaborated on 8 assists together. Frank was also a big help to rookie Ron Ellis, who he worked a lot with, setting up 8 of Ron's 23 goals that year, just above a third. Frank was spreading the wealth, working cohesively with a lot of people such as George Armstrong, Kent Douglas, Bob Pulford, and Pete Stemkowski. Frank was named second-team All-Star for the 3rd time in his career, and combining his 2 first-team selections in the past, this gives him 5 in total for his career. 5 years in a row, as a matter of fact. Teammate Carl Brewer also joins him on the year-end selections. Frank, however, did miss out on the top 10 in both game-winning and even-strength goals this season, and if you saw the first video, you'd know he's prominent on those year-end lists. But he did finish tied for 10th in the league with 7 power play goals with teammate Ron Ellis, Pierre Pilote, John Busick, and Ralph Backstrom. Despite what Frank had been going through this season with his health and coach Imlach, he still managed to lead the team in scoring for the 4th time in 5 seasons and was a second-team All-Star, and showed that in him still beat the heart of a competitor by performing well on the ice and doing all he could to keep his team going. Fans weren't too harsh on our hero this year, especially after he was hospitalized. Well, of course that kind of changed come playoff time, but they still weren't as vicious as usual. But either way, it looks like many fans realized the error of their ways and the way they treated him all these years. But that don't mean it's going to get any easier. As we head into the 1965-66 season, things in Toronto were kind of shrouded in uncertainty, and it actually was really looking bad as Carl Brewer, the Leafs all-star defenseman, fed up with the team, and it seems as the NHL as a whole decided to leave the team and play for Canada's national team instead. And while Andy Bathgate did click well with Frank, his numbers overall were a far cry from what they were in New York for many years. he was traded to Detroit along with longtime Leaf fan favorite, former line mate of Frank's, Billy Harris. In exchange for several players, one of them included Marcel Pronovo, superstar defenseman for many years in Detroit. And some are wondering how much more is Frank going to take from Imlach. I mean, some felt that he was letting this team slip through his fingers, Imlach that is. And well, things in Toronto were just kind of getting zany. Well, to begin the year, Frank Mahovlich played in his 7th straight NHL All-Star game along with new teammate Marcel Pronovo making his 10th appearance, and Bob Bond made his 4th. After a great rookie season, Ron Ellis made his 1st. Frank didn't register any points, but the All-Stars beat the Habs 5-2 at the Forum. Frank, however, got off to one of the worst starts of his career this season. First 12 games, he had 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 points. It was an abysmal, unofficial -13. And going into November 20th, a game with the Chicago Blackhawks at home, the Leafs were 4-6-2 and not off to a good start, and the Boo-Birds were already flying Frank's way yet again. Bobby Hull struck first, and early it was already looking bleak. Early in the second period, Marcel Pronovo cleared out the puck, and it landed on Frank's stick as he rushed it on goal and scored on Dave Dryden. It was 1-1 after 1. 1:18 into the second period on a power play. Alan Stanley anchors it, Frank takes the wheel, and Keon sails away with the goal. It remains 2-1 after 2. Then in the third period, Pronovo to the Big M, to Davey Keon. 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points, first star of the game. And on Saturday, of course, Hockey Night in Canada, making it count on that national television stage. Oh yeah. Many were hoping this game would get the least of momentum going forward. However, in a loss to lowly Boston, Frank would score the 231st goal of his career, which put him past Ted Teeter Kennedy as the all-time leader in Leafs history in goals scored. This was a huge accomplishment for Frank Mahovlich. However, some members of the media were quick to remind people that Frank wasn't a big star or iconic like Teeter was. How nice of them. Gotta love Toronto. In December, Frank played decently. 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points in 12 games on unofficial -3, but the Leafs were starting to win. And speaking of win, Frank scored a game winner in a win over Detroit. Then next game, scored a game winner again, this time against the Habs. And then a game winner against the Rangers. He was delivering in the clutch once again and gave him momentum headed into January. And happy New Year, Frankie boy. He was on fire. 9 goals, 5 assists, 14 points, and a big unofficial +7 in 14 games. And he began his happy New Year on January 1st with a goal and 2 assists for 3 points. He did the same against Montreal on January 13, a dominant 6-0 win. Why? And then he had 2 goals, including the, you guessed it, game winner and another win over Boston. The very next game, he had 2 goals again and a loss to the Rangers. In February, Frank had 10 points in 12 games, including a goal and a helper against the Habs, and did the same to tie with the Rangers later in the month. He finished the season strong, 8 goals, 5 apples, 13 points in total over 15 games of March, a notch and an apple against Boston on the 6th, and the only goal in a win over Detroit on March 9th, meaning it's another game winner. 10 days later, a goal and an assist in a win over the Hawks, which included reaching 30 goals this season for the 4th time in his career, for the first time since 62-63, and 8 days later, another big game and a dominant win over the Rangers. The Leafs finished 34, 25, and 11, bit up from the year prior, good enough for 3rd place in the NHL. And here we go once again, as it is now, playoff time. And standing in the way for their 4th straight year, the team that ended their dynasty last season, the defending Stanley Cup champion Montreal Canadiens. The Habs were even better this year, finishing 41, 21, and 8. Oh my goodness, for a monster 90 points. Taking 1st place with ease, it seemed. The Leafs, however, went 7-5-2, winning the season series against the Habs, had more success than any other team against Montreal, handing them 1/3 of their losses, so an upset was definitely in the cards. But this Montreal team was still intact from last season, and Beliveau was written off by some in terms of his dominant presence on the ice, but he finished 4th in league scoring, was a runner-up for the Hart Trophy, and a 2nd-team All-Star for the 3rd time. Bobby Rousseau had an outstanding season, reaching the 30-goal mark for the first time, tied for 2nd in the league scoring with Stan Mikita's 78 points, was a runner-up for the Lady Byng Trophy and a 2nd-team All-Star for the first time. Henry Richard's 61 points was good enough for 9th in the league, showing how valuable he still was to the team in his 11th season, also playing in his 8th NHL All-Star game. And Jacques Laperriere, who won the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman, despite missing 13 games, had good offensive numbers with 31 points, and was of course a 1st-team All-Star. And the Gumper in net. In his 14th season, he had a career year. 29 wins, big 2.36 goals against average, a huge .920 save percentage, 2 shutouts, and sharing the Vezina Trophy with Charlie Hodge and garnering his first ever year-end All-Star team selection. But here we go. Game 1, the Montreal form is tied 1-1 in the second period. Power play. Hillman finds Armstrong, who sets up Mahovlich. The Leafs lead 2-1 after 1. The Habs took a 3-2 lead after 2. Pulford tied it in the second. But then Velivo scored the game winner with 2:12 to play. Montreal takes the first game. Game 2, the story is Soaring and Gumper in the nets. Frank does not play overly well. The Habs win it 2-0. The series switched to Maple Leaf Gardens for Game 3, and it's not good. As the Big M plays a below-average outing, huge game from Beliveau and Gumper get the Habs a 5-2 win, and the Leafs are on the verge of being swept. Game 4, Frank needs to step up, and so does the rest of the team, and they don't. Frank has one shot on goal. Gumper and Tremblay help the Leafs win help the Habs win, easy for me to say, 4-1. And the Leafs season, just like that, is over. And sadly, Frank plays a very disappointing series with just 1 goal and an unofficial -2. He had 7 shots on goal in 4 games. Habs grinders and defense had his number. Frank was about to face some harsh words from the city of Toronto yet again, and Montreal went on to beat Detroit in 6 games for their second straight Stanley Cup. But Frank did have a very impressive regular season. 32 goals, 24 assists for 56 points in 68 games. This year, Punch Imlach put together a super line, if you will. And despite being teammates with George Armstrong the whole time Frank has played in Toronto, and being teammates with Dave Keon for the last 6 seasons, he was never on a full-time line with them, but had been shifted with them in the past to success. And again, the results this year were tremendous. Armstrong set up Frank 17 times, just above half of Mahovlich's goal, and nearly half of Armstrong's assists that year were to the Big M. And in total, they teamed up for 27 goals one way or another. As for Dave Keon, Frank set him up 10 times this year for his goals, just slightly under half Keon's goal total, as well as Frank's overall assist total. And they also teamed up for 4 assist collaborations and also teamed up for 27 goals together. Alan Stanley also worked well with Frank to set up 4 goals together. And this is also the first year since Red Kelly had come to Toronto that he and Frank did not team up for a single goal. Frank's 32 goals were second best in the entire NHL, only behind the dominant record-breaking Bobby Hull's 54 goals. This is the 5th time Frank has finished in the top 10 in goal scoring. Frank made the top 5 in even strength goals with 22, tied for 5th with Gordie Howe and Gilles Tremblay, and teammate Eddie Shack was tied for 2nd in the league. He also tied for 6th in the league with power play goals with 10, along with Don Marshall, Doug Mons, and Bobby Rousseau, and was tied for 6th in game-winning goals along with teammates Dave Keon and Eddie Shack, as well as Phil Esposito and Alex Delvecchio. And for the 6th straight season, Frank Mahovlich has been named to a year-end All-Star team. This would be his 4th in terms of second All-Star team selections, still securing his place as one of the best forwards in the NHL in this era. Joining him on the second team All-Stars was 40-year-old defenseman Alan Stanley. And another season in the books for our hero. Frank Mahovlich was still among the league elite, but yet the ones who seemed to notice it the least was the actual city he plays in. He became the Leafs' all-time goal-scoring leader and led his team in points this time, tied with Bob Pulford, and 5th time he's accomplished that. Now, as the Leafs team continues to age, many wonder what's next for next year. I mean, Frank is still only 28 years old, granted, and playing superb hockey, but I mean, what's around him may not seem to last. And either way, very few guessed what could have laid ahead in the future in more ways than one. So, here we are, the Big M, Frank Mahovlich, 28 years old, almost 29. He's about to enter his 10th NHL season, all of which have been spent with Toronto. And despite the flip-flopping of the fans, the media, and even his coach, it is clear his value to this team is still direly needed. The Leafs team is the oldest team in the league going into this season, and while entering the year, the team did have an astonishing 10 future Hall of Famers on it. The bulk of them, however, had their best years in the rearview mirror. Armstrong and Horton were 36, so was Sawchuk. Pronovo was 37, Bauer was 42, Kelly was 39, Alan Stanley was 40. Some say this was mainly because of 2 reasons. 1, Imlach's inability to move on from the past, or a bad player development system at number 2. Although guys like Ron Ellis were evolving, but Pappen and Stemkowski weren't living up to standards according to some. And they did have great success in the minor leagues. Many felt this, quote, over-the-hill gang were in for a long year. But Frank is in his prime. Let's see what he can do for us in his 10th season. Frank started the year decent enough, 7 goals, 2 assists for 9 points in 16 games. That included a 2-goal game against the Chicago Blackhawks on November 23rd. The Leafs were off to a pretty good start, and in December he was still pretty consistent too. 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points in 12 games, which included 2 assists against the Wings. And the very next day, against 18-year-old Bobby Orr and the Bruins in a dominant 8-3 win, Frank had a goal and a helper. And on December 14th, scored a game winner in a much tighter game with the Bruins, with just under 5 minutes left in regulation. January, however, was a disaster, not just for Frank, but for the Leafs as a whole. Frank had a goal and 2 assist performance against the Red Wings in a 5-2 win on Hockey Night in Canada, where he was named the game's first star in an excellent performance on January 14th. 4 days later, he played in the NHL All-Star Game, which was now moved to mid-season, on January 18th. It is Frank's 8th NHL All-Star Game appearance, along with teammates Alan Stanley making his 6th and Dave Keon making his 4th. However, the All-Stars were shut out by the Habs 3-0, and the Leafs would then proceed to go on a 10-game losing streak around this time. Frank missed a few games in that stretch, and the tension with Imlach was building further. Frank had 6 points in 11 games and was an unofficial -3. Frank, however, played excellently in February. 9 games, he had 2 goals, 8 assists for 10 points, and was an unofficial +6. The Leafs went on a 7-game winning streak. That included a goal and an assist in a dominant win over the resurgent Rangers team, led by Harry Howell, 2 assists in a win over the Montreal Canadiens, and a goal and an assist in a win over the struggling Red Wings. In the final 15 games of the season, Leafs played decently. Frank had 4 goals and 8 assists for 12 points, including a goal and 2 helpers against the Blackhawks for another 3-point night, 2 assists in a loss to the Habs, and a goal and an assist against the Rangers. The goal was the game winner. The Leafs finished 32, 27, and 11 for 75 points. Good enough for 3rd place in NHL. And despite the roller coaster ride of a season, it is indeed, once again, playoff time. And awaiting them is a foe they have not faced since their Stanley Cup win in 1962, the Chicago Blackhawks. And since then, the Hawks have become more powerful, dominant, and star-studded. They were coached by Billy Ray, who coached the Leafs during Frank's rookie season. But now he has a Hawks team that has finished a monster 41, 17, and 12 for 94 points. And during the season, the Leafs went 4-8-2 against the Hawks. And many experts, pundits, and analysts were pretty much saying the Leafs season was over before the series was even going to start. And they're also labeling the Hawks the next dynasty in pro hockey. And to be fair, it was easy to see why, on paper anyway. Stan Mikita had an epic season, 97 points, tying the NHL record for points in the season, which he now shares with teammate Bobby Hull, who we will get to. But Stan Mikita to this day is the only Triple Crown winner. He won the Art Ross Trophy for the league scoring title, the Laney being for excellence in sportsmanship, and of course the Hart Trophy as league MVP. He's now a much different player than the Leafs faced back in '62. And yes, Bobby Hull, 52 goals, 80 points. The former led the league. The latter made him second to Mikita. He reached 50 goals for the 3rd time, the first player in NHL history to have multiple 50-goal seasons. He was a finalist for the Hart Trophy and a first-team All-Star for the 6th time. He and Mikita were the most dangerous players in the game when it came to what they could do on the score sheet and their other natural skills. Ken Horam also reached the 30-goal mark this season and was 4th in league scoring, but a new star had emerged in Chicago this season. Phil Esposito, his 21 goals and 40 assists for 61 points, was 7th best in league scoring, and his unofficial +34 was 5th best for that year. A big year for that youngster, and they'd be nuts not to hang on to this guy. They also had Doug Mons, who could also play defense, finishing 9th in league scoring with 60 points. Also, Bobby's younger brother, Dennis Hull, was starting to emerge, 25 goals. They also had a young Ken Hodge, Chico Mackey, Eric Nestorenko, and Bill Hay to round out a solid forward core. The defense is still being led by Pierre Pilot, who was once again a runner-up for the Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman. He notched 46 assists and had 52 total points, and was within the top 20 among all league scorers. He was the first-team All-Star for the 5th time in his career, and at 35, still at the top of his game. And joining him on this blue line was Doug Jarrett, who also received some Norris Trophy votes, a very reliable Pat Stapleton, nasty Ed Van Imp. Glenn Hall was still with the Hawks in net, but dealing with injuries, but still had an excellent year, was a second-team All-Star and won the Vezina Trophy, which he shared with Denis Desjardins, or Denis Desjardins, I should say, who had an incredible year, 22, 12, and 7, a monster .923 save percentage, and 4 shutouts. He deserves a lot of credit for Chicago's big season. Yeah, Toronto's rich, written out before the puck even drops in the first game, but either way, here we go. Game 1, Chicago Stadium. The Hawks scored first, but just under 2 minutes later, the Leafs are on a power play of their own. Keon surveys it, and Mahovlich takes it, he scores! The game is tied 1-1, but that's as good as it gets. The Leafs lose 5-2. Desjardins stopped them 42 times. Game 2, however, it looked much better. The Leafs led 2-0 after Stamkowski and Keon scored goals in the first, and then the top dog line, Davey to Frankie, who sets up Georgie Boy. The Leafs led 3-0. Sawchuk would give up 1 goal, but played brilliantly otherwise. The Leafs win 3-1, and the series is tied. Game 3, we are in Toronto, and the Leafs lead 1-0 after 1, and on a power play, Papin gets it to Walton, gets it to Frank Mahovlich. He scores! Papin adds another. Sawchuk plays great, and like last game, the Hawks do get one back, but the Leafs take it 3-1. They shocked the world by even taking a 2-1 series lead, and they have another game to play at home still. Game 4 in Toronto, the Hawks score 9 seconds into the game, but then Mahovlich comes up with the puck along with Brian Conacher, who takes it and sets up Keon, at least tie it. The Hawks, however, retake the lead, but 1:42 later, Mahovlich finds Tim Horton. His slap is sweeter than a walnut crunch, and the Leafs tie it 2-2, and it stays that way after 1. And also after 2. But then in the third, Nestorenko and Hull score. Time is winding down, but Hillman gets it to Mahovlich, who says, Mike Walton. 2:20 remaining. The Leafs have life, but it's not enough. 3 assists from our hero, and it still couldn't get the Leafs the win. The Hawks tie the series with a 4-3 win. Perhaps reality is finally hitting. Game 5, back in Chicago. The Hawks leading 2-1 in the first period, but then power play. Walton tick. Keon tack. Mahovlich goal! The Leafs have tied it 2-2, and like the last game, it stays that way after the first and second period. Stamkowski and Papin score, and the latter played the game of his life. The Leafs win it 4-2 and are 1 win away from pulling off a big upset and heading back to the Stanley Cup. The 6th game at Maple Leaf Gardens is psyched. 5:06 in, it's Davey Keon, it's Frankie Mahovlich. They set up Brian Conacher, and the Leafs strike first. Stapleton, however, ties it on a shorthanded effort. It's 1-1 after 1, and after 2. Conacher scored his second goal of the game, then Stamkowski scores, and the clock counts down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The Big M is getting another shot at glory. The Toronto Maple Leafs, for the 6th time in 9 seasons, are going to the Stanley Cup. Frank played very, very well. 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points, including his big 3-assist performance in Game 4. He was working hard in this series to get the Leafs back to prominence and led the team and the series in scoring. Oh, once again, we're off to the big dance. So now Frank Mahovlich gets to play in his 6th Stanley Cup final and go for his 4th overall championship. And this year was far from Frank's best. It might have been even one of his worst when all was said and done. But he carries momentum heading in to the Stanley Cup final. And awaiting the Leafs, oh boy, here we go again. The 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion Montreal Canadiens. And how fitting is it? It's Canada's centennial year, and that these 2 Canadian teams face off for the game's big prize in what will be the last year of the original 6. It's a rubber match. After all, the Leafs beat the Habs in 63-64 en route to the final and then winning the Cup. The Habs did the same the prior 2 seasons en route to the final and then winning the Cup. Now they get to face in the final. Montreal finished 32-25-13 for 77 points. Good enough for 2nd place in the NHL. A mere 2 points ahead of Toronto. However, the Habs were still deemed a heavy favorite as they had momentum on their side. Again, 2 Stanley Cups going into this. And the season series, however, was tied 6-2. The Habs, however, swept up the Rangers to get here. Henry Richard had another great year, tied for 10th in scoring with 55 points, 4th in Hart Trophy voting, and was actually the NHL All-Star Game MVP that year. Bobby Rousseau was continuing to shine with 63 points, leading his team at 6th best in the league. A new star was emerging in Montreal, and young speedy winger Yvan Cournoyer, who led the league in power play goals. Jean Beliveau was still on the team, but the captain missed 17 games due to injury, but they still had a strong core otherwise. Dick Duff has been key for the Habs in many games. You had Ralph Backstrom, John Ferguson, Gilles Tremblay, Claude LaRose, and veteran Claude Provost rounding them out. On defense, J.C. Tremblay had an outstanding year, was 5th in Norris Trophy voting. Also, Jacques Laperriere had another excellent season, got some votes for the Norris, as did the underrated Terry Harper. Also, you had Ted or Ed Harris, whatever you want to call him this week, and veteran Jean-Guy Talbot still had a lot to offer. The Habs goaltending faced a lot of obstacles this year between injuries and inconsistent play between Gup Worsley and Charlie Hodge, so for these playoffs, the Habs went with unheralded rookie Rogie Vachon, who had a very good regular season, was 11-3-5, and of those 11 wins, 4 were shutouts. He had a .248 goals against average, a .915 save percentage, and has played very well in these playoffs, but here we go. Game 1 in Montreal, it's an embarrassing outing. Frank doesn't quite play as bad as his teammates did in this series, but the Habs throttled them 6-2 on the strength of Henri Richard's hat trick. Game 2, the Leafs regroup and go with Johnny Bower in net. Stemkowski scores the only goal of the first period with a power play. Mahovlich to Pepin to Walton. The Leafs take a 2-0 lead. Horton makes it 3-0. Bower is just ageless in net with a 31-save shutout. The series is tied. We are headed to Toronto. Game 3 at the Gardens. It's an all-time classic. Beliveau and Stemkowski exchange power play markers in the first. In the second period, Papin and Ferguson exchange goals. Then 21-year-old Vachon, 42-year-old Bower, they go to work, making sensational save after save, stop after stop, not letting anything get by. The third period ends and we're off to OT. The 2 goalies are amazing as 1 OT becomes 2. And then 8:26 into the double overtime period, Bob Pulford scores an infamous goal to at least take a 2-1 series lead. However, Game 4 is another embarrassing outing for the Leafs. Sachek goes back in net, and the Habs decimate them like they did in the first game. Backstrom, Beliveau, Richard, and Cornway are unstoppable. A 6-2 win for Montreal. The series is tied 2-2. Game 5, we head back to Montreal. The Habs lead 1-0 in the first period, but then power play. David Keon, Francis Mahovlich, get it to Jimmy Papin, who has been the breakout star of these playoffs. It's tie game. Second period, Conacher, Pronovo, Keon, they all score, make it 4-1. Vachon's night is over after 2 periods. Sachek shakes out the frustration and stars in net, and at least hang on for a 4-1 lead and a 4-1 win, and take the series lead 3-2. They are 1 win away from recapturing glory. Game 6, Toronto, Maple Leaf Gardens, May 2nd, 1967. The Habs go with the Gumper on this one, as these old dogs in Toronto want to show the Habs they have new tricks. After a scoreless first period where Gumper and Sachek stole the show, in the second, Ron Ellis, who had been quiet in these playoffs, scores a huge goal, and then Pepin scores. It's 2-0 after 2 periods. The Leafs are 20 minutes away from reclaiming the big prize, but former Leaf Dick Duff keeps the Habs in the game to a course of loud boos. The pressure is on, but the clock is ticking down. The Habs pull up Worsley with under a minute to go. A face-off deep into Toronto zone, and Kelly wins the face-off. The puck gets to Pulford, up to Armstrong, who launches it in the empty net, and he scores! 47 seconds left. The Leafs lead 3-1, and yeah, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, a 0. The Toronto Maple Leafs win their 4th cup in 6 seasons. The name Frank Mahovlich will be engraved on the cup for the 4th time. What a huge moment. The over-the-hill gang does it. Frank, however, was not overly present in this series, but still had a couple of assists. And regardless, his play in the semifinals was still tremendous and helped get the Leafs here. Frank Mahovlich, 4-time Stanley Cup champion. Frank was tied for 5th in playoff scoring with 10 points, sharing the spot with Montreal's Henri Richard. His play in the Chicago series was key in the Leafs getting to the cup. Frank Mahovlich had 18 goals, 28 assists for 46 points in 63 games. Not an overly stellar year, tying his career low on goals and failing to reach 20 for only the 2nd time in his career, and his 2nd lowest point total of his NHL career at this point too. Despite this, he and Dave Keon still worked very well together, Keon setting up 8 of Frank's goals, nearly half, and the 2 collaborating on 6 assists, until they worked together to produce 19 goals. Frank set up youngster Ron Ellis 6 times, which is more than a third of Ellis's goals. Frank also worked well with old linemate Red Kelly, as well as Jim Papin, who was slowly emerging. Frank didn't finish in the top 10 of any major categories. His streak of 6 straight end-season All-Star team selections came to an end. As far as regular season production goes, this was his worst. Since his 3rd season, but either way, be that as it may, he still finished 2nd on the team in scoring, played in another NHL All-Star game, and above all else, he was a Stanley Cup champion for the 4th time. But now with 10 seasons in Toronto in the books, it's now time to wonder just how much longer can Frank put up with the tension on this team between he and management, especially Imlach. And also now with Frank's production issues slipping, well, this isn't the only thing changing in the NHL now, as the league was about to double in size. Indeed, for the first time, the NHL was about to undergo a major expansion. 6 new teams were added to the league, bringing us 12 in total. You have the LA Kings, the Minnesota North Stars, the St. Louis Blues, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Philadelphia Flyers. And as of 2023, they have 26 Stanley Cup appearances between them and 11 total Stanley Cup wins. The Oakland Seals, I mean, they had a really nice logo. But anyway, a new era was embarking on the NHL. And now the league was divided into 2 divisions, the East, which was all the original 6 teams, and the West, which was all the new teams. Yeah, you thought Bettman was trying to fix things these days. Anyway, those western cities of Pittsburgh, Philly, and Bloomington, Minnesota, I'm sure are just glad to be in the NHL anyway. Yeah, well, the league has now moved up to 74 games in its regular season schedule. Also, plus-minus was now an official stat in the NHL this season going forward. But for Frank Mahovlich and the defending Stanley Cup champion Toronto Maple Leafs, the expansion draft was going to affect them. Well, actually, even before that was to happen, Red Kelly had retired at the age of 40 after 22 Hall of Fame NHL seasons. But now they'd also lose Terry Sawchuk to the Kings, and they'd lose a bunch of players to Oakland. They lost goaltender Gary Smith, who was in their system. Bob Bond also went to Oakland, as did Ken Douglas. The Leafs' failure to develop younger players in their system could definitely come back to haunt them. As for Frank, despite being part of a championship club, his relationship with the organization just wasn't improving. But hey, he looked good early on, 8 goals in 8 games, and in the second game of the season scored a goal and 2 assists for 3 points against the Chicago Blackhawks. And the Leafs were a bit back and forth to start the year. They had a 4-4-0 record. But then on November 1st against the Montreal Canadiens, the Leafs rubbed salt in their wounds during their Stanley Cup rematch with a monster 5-0 win. Frank had a goal and 2 assists, the latter of which went to Keon Armstrong. He was named first star of the game. And while Leaf fans were still vile towards him at times, he got his appreciation in this one and got quite an ovation, but then once again, checked into a hospital, and it wasn't hidden this time. He was suffering from depression and tension. Frank's breakdowns were just becoming very intense, and it had to be coming to the point where it just can't be ignored anymore. Despite all the success and the glory, was it really worth it for Frank Mahovlich nowadays? Frank didn't like letting his teammates down, however, so after 11 games, he returned on November 29th in a home game against the Habs, and he had an assist in a win, and then scored a goal and an assist in a tie with Detroit the very next day. Frank started December, however, with a 5-game scoring slump. The Leafs would only register 1 win in that stretch. But hey, he broke it in a huge game against the Rangers on December 16th, including the game winner. He did the very same thing on Christmas Day against the Red Wings, including the game winner. But his big night came on December 30th. What a game Frank had against the expansion St. Louis Blues, as the Leafs led 3-0 after the first period. Frank assisting on a power play marker for Walton. But then Frank scored not 1, but 2 goals in the third period, both set up by Pronovo, as well as Armstrong and Keon getting 1 apple each on them. Leafs led 6-0 after 2 periods. As this game was moving forward, Frank was getting cheered every time he touched the puck. Then in the third period, power play. Hillman to Pepin to Frank Mahovlich, getting the hat-trick. Maple Leaf Gardens goes nuts. The 6th hat-trick of his career, his first in 7 years. And hey, Frank is known for performing well on Hockey Night in Canada and did it again on this night. His 4-point night gave him, of course, the first star selection, which, hey, the media was all over singing his praises, as were the fans. What did they for the Big M, number 27, Frank Mahovlich? The Leafs were looking sharp. January, things would look good for our hero, but they wouldn't stay that way. He had a goal and a helper against the resurgent Bruins team led by Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito in a tie game. And how about this? On his 30th birthday, January 10th, 1968, Frank scored 2 goals, including the game winner against the Red Wings. Was once again the first star, and the fans were chanting his name. He then had a goal and an assist as the Leafs embarrassed the expansion Penguins. Then on January 16th, he played in his 9th NHL All-Star game as the Leafs faced the NHL All-Stars. Early in the game, Hillman and Frank set up Murray Oliver for a goal. Then he and Hillman set up Ellis for the eventual game winner in a 4-3 win for the Leafs. Frank then had 2 goals against expansion Minnesota in a 5-1 win. Frank would then go into a 5-game scoring slump, however, and a -3 to end the month. The Leafs were looking sluggish, and Imlach was getting fed up, but quite frankly, so was Frank. The tension continued to rise as the fear of another nervous breakdown was likely imminent. Mahovlich still had 6 goals and 2 helpers and 8 points in 13 overall games, and was an even 0. On February 3rd, 1968, at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, the Leafs had to settle for a 3-3 tie with the Penguins. Frank was in on all 3 goals, 2 goals and an assist, and that would be the last time Frank would obtain a 3-star selection after a game in Toronto. During that big game, however, the Leafs were in the midst of a second game of a 9-game winless streak. And after that game against the Penguins, Frank would just score 1 goal, no assists in 12 games, a horrendous -9. And even though the Leafs had broken the winless streak, oh man, Frank just wasn't getting any better. His issues with Imlach were getting to a fever pitch to the point of constant arguing where they couldn't go a few minutes without getting each other's face. The fans were angry, the media was venomous, it was just overall a toxic atmosphere. On March 2nd in 1968, the Leafs hosted an okay LA Kings team at Maple Leaf Gardens. How fitting that the game was on Hockey Night in Canada. Frank had 3 shots on goal, but his drought continued despite the Leafs winning 5-2. This was Frank Mahovlich's 720th career NHL game, all played with the Leafs, and it would be his last in the Leafs uniform. At this point in the NHL's history, this may arguably have been the biggest trade ever. On March 3rd, 1968, the Toronto Maple Leafs sent Frank Mahovlich, along with Pete Stemkowski, who they'd pretty much given up on, Gary Unger, who was never really given a fair chance, and the rights to all-star defenseman Carl Brewer, who at that point was playing for Muskegon of the IHL, to the Detroit Red Wings. For the other superstar in the trade, Norm Ullman, veteran winger Floyd Smith, young promising forward Paul Henderson, and defensive prospect Doug Barry. When news hit the media, a lot of fans were furious. Yes, despite their back-and-forth fickle treatment of Frank Mahovlich in the 11 seasons he has played there, he was seen as the man who was the team's biggest star in the last decade. The press and the media were mixed. Some thought it was a good idea, others thought it was in the middle, questionable, while others outright hated it. When a press conference was put together to announce the trade, Frank spoke publicly by saying, quote, "Business is business. If I can't please them here, maybe I'll be able to please them there." A blunt, honest, mincing no words statement, yet without much bitterness thrown in. But it almost seems that that one simple statement, the years of frustration finally came out verbally. In his final season in Toronto, Frank Mahovlich scored 19 goals, 17 assists for 36 points in 50 games. His last days in Toronto were with the 2 of his fellow stars during his time there on the top line. Keon set up 13 of Frank's 19 goals, all but 6. And of course, Mahovlich returned the favor to Keon with 6 assists of Davies' goals. Together they produced 23 goals. And with assists, he collaborated with George Armstrong 5 times, and they themselves produced 15 goals one way or another. But now he bids goodbye to his longtime brothers-in-arms. In hindsight, many wonder how nobody saw this coming. Keep in mind, superstar trades like this were not overly common like you think, like they are today. He played in his 9th NHL All-Star game and was leading the Leafs in goals when he was traded. The weight of the world that is the media capital of Canada, Toronto, Ontario, no longer weighs down on the Big M. His last season was another struggle off the rink, resulting in troubles on the rink. Either way, the Big M's legacy lives on in that town to this very day. And what more can you say about Frank Mahovlich's time in Toronto? Despite the hardships and the heartache, he became one of the most successful Leafs players in terms of their history. Count them up. 4 Stanley Cup championships, a finalist 2 other times. His performances in the 62 and 64 playoffs were remarkable, as was his performance against the Chicago Blackhawks in the 67 semifinals. He led the Leafs with 60 playoff points. It was safe to say that he was going to be a winner no matter what from the get-go, appreciate it or not. I mean, when he won the Calder Trophy, along the way, 6 consecutive Team All-Star selections, 2 First-Team All-Star awards in 61 and 63, and 4 Second-Team All-Star selections in 62, 64, 65, and 66. Speaking of All-Stars, 9 NHL All-Star Game appearances consecutively, often playing well in the exhibition showdown, winning the second ever All-Star MVP in 1963. And hey, how about team records? Goals in the season with 48, points in the season with 84. He led the team as their all-time leading goal scorer with 296. Actually, his 597 points were the second best on the Leafs all-time when he left, just 2 behind teammate George Armstrong, who had 599 at the point. He led the Leafs to the best record in the league in 1963. He led his team in scoring 5 times, and in the league, top 10 in scoring 3 times, top 10 in goals 5 times, and also, he led the league in even strength goals in 61, was top 10 4 other times, next 3 years, as well as 1966, and top 10 in game-winning goals 3 times and 2 other times, led the league in 62 and 63. Also, top 10 in power play goals 4 times. Toronto was giving up a lot. Frank played 720 games in Toronto between 1957 and 1968. He was also an unofficial plus 96 during his time there. Frank was loved at times by fans, and even the media appreciated him at certain points, but he was trashed unnecessarily. But take a good look at this list. Does this look like someone who deserved that kind of treatment from anyone? Look, I know a lot of coaches are like Punch Imlach back in those days, but Mahovlich would go on to say that Imlach was tough but fair during his first few years in Toronto, but as his time went on, the tyranny got worse and worse. With all due respect to Leaf Hall of Famers Daryl Sittler, Lanny McDonald, and Matt Sundin, they did not have the career in Toronto that Big M did. They did not accomplish what he had accomplished, and yeah, Sundin and Sittler are 1 and 2 all-time in Leaf scoring, and were great hockey players. They didn't quite hit the bar that Frank did. As a matter of fact, not many who came through Toronto did. Often when the list of the greatest Leafs of all time is released, Frank is always in the top 10, sometimes even in the top 5. And despite it all, his heart and dedication to his team pumped Maple Leaf blue blood in his veins. But those days have officially come to an end. So now the Frank Mahovlich era in Detroit is about to begin. The Detroit Red Wings, despite not dominating the regular season like they once did in the 1950s, were usually perennial contenders, and of course, as covered in Part 1, were beaten by the Leafs twice in the Stanley Cup Finals in 63 and 64. They had a great year in 65, but were stunned in the playoffs, and they made it to the Cup in 66, but lost to Montreal. They collapsed terribly in the 66-67 season. This year hasn't been much better, hence the shakeup they felt they needed to make as well. The team has now been coached by Hall of Fame Wings player Sid Abel for 11 seasons. He is also a GM, a role he has now held for 6 seasons. Some say Mahovlich is entering a situation that is more or less what he left in Toronto, and no, I don't mean ungrateful fans or a brain-sharing media, or even a nightmare for a coach, but that the Wings are aging as a team in many ways, but more so with their top stars above all. Gordie Howe, however, is nearing 40 years old and is still one of the best players in the league. Alex Delvecchio at 36 is still among the elite forwards in the NHL, and at this point, moving up the NHL's all-time scoring list himself. But Abel also wants to make something out of the youngsters in this trade, Unger and Stemkowski. At this point, they were trying to develop a young forward in Gary Jarrett. They had Bruce McGregor, who is pretty solid, showing some promise, but was having a lackluster year. They had a good veteran in Dean Prentice, now in his 16th season, and role players such as Ted Hampson, Doug Roberts, and occasional minor league call-up Pete Mahovlich. Yes, Frank's younger brother, 8.5 years his junior. Pete has had, however, a rough time developing when called up at times, but is playing pretty well in the minor leagues. On defense, the core is led by Gary Bergman, a tough no-nonsense blue liner who shows a lot of ferocity out there. And the team also acquired Kent Douglas midseason, a former teammate of Frank's in Toronto for many years. The rest of the defense was lacking in a real oomph, so to speak. Bart Crashley, Howie Young, and Burt Marshall were really not proving themselves in the lineup. Young Jim Watson shows a little bit of promise, and they did have a very talented goalie in Roger Crozier, and they had minor league journeyman 30-year-old rookie Roy Edwards, but neither were playing overly well, and Crozier was battling injuries and illness all year. Well, as Mahovlich readies for his first game as a Red Wing, they have 13 games left in the season, and it's not looking good whatsoever. The Red Wings would pretty much have to win at least 11 games, and the Bruins would probably have to lose pretty much all 11 games for it to even be possible. It's not looking very good at all. Frank Mahovlich's 721st career game and first as a Red Wing took place on the road against Rod Gilbert, Jean Rattel, and the New York Rangers. It was a disaster. The Wings got clobbered 6-1. Frank did not register a single shot on goal, and is a -3. Oy. But now 3 days later, oh boy, yes, just a second game away, is against his former team at the arena known as Maple Leaf Gardens. God knows what Frank's mindset must have been after all the drama and hardship. Who knows what he was thinking going into this game. But as he stepped through the visitors' corridor onto the ice, the Leafs fans gave him a hero's welcome back. Maybe it was the old adage of you don't know what you got till it's gone. The game, again, was broadcast on Hockey Night in Canada on CBC. The game actually drew the year's largest audience for a Leafs game that season. A lot of focus was on Frank's return. The welcome he got, the ovation was definitely unexpected. And then 7:20 into the game, it happened. Gary Bergman got the puck up to Frank, and he scored his 20th goal of the season. The 9th time in 11 seasons he has reached that mark. The 297th of his career, first as a Red Wing. Scored on Bruce Gamble, and the fans cheered Wow, what a moment it was in Toronto at Maple Leaf Gardens. The fans showed number 27 that despite how they may have been towards him at times, they truly were at long last grateful for everything he had done for them. Early in the second period, Frank took a feed from Mr. Hockey himself, Gordie Howe, and set up young Gary Unger for a goal. The Wings were up 4-0 at this point, but they fell apart with a pretty pathetic 7-5 loss, as Norm Ullman got 3 points for the Leafs, sticking it to his old team, as well as Frank. The Wings' playoff hopes were pretty much dashed, but if anything, the season still wasn't over, and Frank Mahovlich wants to show the Red Wings they made a good investment. The very next game against Boston, he had a goal and an assist, the latter of which coming on the first goal of the game, helping Gordie Howe with a power play goal. The goal came on an empty netter. Detroit beat Boston 7-5. He then collaborated with brother Peter to set up Gordie in a 2-2 tie with the Kings. He scores a goal and 2 assists in a win over the St. Louis Blues for 3 points. And after an assist in a loss against the Stars, Frank finally plays his first game at the Olympia in a Red Wings uniform and gets a great ovation from the Detroit fans in attendance. Their opponents, the Leafs. But the Wings lose 5-2. Frank gets another helper. He had 2 assists in a loss to the Habs, and then back-to-back 2-goal games. Wow. First 2 goals, including the game winner, was an upset over Boston, and then a 3-1 win over Chicago after that. This was the culmination of a 6-game point streak, totaling 11 points, nearly 2 points a game. He's back. But the Wings did indeed miss the playoffs, finishing dead last in the East with a 27-35-12 record for a mere 66 points. It was the first time since Frank's rookie season he will not be participating in the playoffs. So it's the first time since Frank's rookie season that the Leafs will not be participating in the playoffs. Despite a winning record, they came in 5th place in the East. Frank finished the season strong in Detroit. 7 goals, 9 assists, 16 points in just 13 games since the trade of the Wings. And right away they put him along with young, unproven Gary Unger, and well, what results? Gordie and Gary each assisted on 3 of Frank's goals, all but the first one he scored with a team which Gary Bergman set up. More than half of Frank's assists were to Gordie Howe with 5. The other 4 were all to Unger. And speaking of Unger, the 2 collaborated on for 3 assists. Frank overall produced 10 goals in one way or another with both Howe and Unger. His move to Detroit seemed like the move he needed for his own well-being and his career going forward. He gave the team some more life, and despite missing the playoffs for only the 2nd time in his career, Frank's at least given the city of Detroit some hope for its hockey fans, and his instant chemistry with Gordie Howe has Red Wing fans very excited for what may be ahead. For the 6th time in his career, Frank Mahovlich finished in the top 10 for even strength goals, finishing 8th with 24 on the year. Lots of familiar faces. Just ahead of him was his former linemate in Toronto for a short time, Bob Nevin, who was with the Rangers. And former teammate Ron Ellis, still with the Leafs, was 4th. And the man the Leafs traded him for, Norm Ullman, finished 3rd. Whew. So ends the craziest year of Frank Mahovlich's career. He starts the year as a member of the defending champion Leafs, is hospitalized just a day after playing a huge game, comes back, tries with all his might, but playing for MLAC had just finally pushed him to the brink that he had nothing left. He still played in his 9th NHL All-Star game, however, and was part of that blockbuster trade to Detroit. He thrived in his short time with the Red Wings, and in total all season between both teams, 26 goals, 26 assists, 52 points in 63 games, excellent numbers, still producing at a high level despite everything, and finishing with an official +5 now I should say, on top of that. There's hope again in Detroit as Frank can put Toronto behind him. So now the Big M enters his first full season as a Red Wing and is still just 30 years old and showed in 13 games the year prior that he could still produce, which is why new head coach Bill Gadsby is going to put Frank with Gordie Howe as well as Alex Delvecchio on the same line. Huge possibilities there. Sid Abel is still the general manager of this team and is trying to build something in hopes that the Wings can start succeeding again. The Wings defense does need a shot in the arm, and they got it. Abel acquired Frank's former longtime Leafs teammate, Bob Bond. And hey, about to see more action this year is Frank's younger brother, Peter. There was some excitement in Detroit, but it wasn't going to come easy. But what's ahead for Frank in 1968-69? It's going to be something to behold. The NHL schedule is now moving to 76 games. To start the season in October, the Wings looked somewhat decent. Frank was off to a good start with 3 points in 5 games. But in the final game of the month, on Halloween of 1968, hosting the Big Bad Bruins, led by phenom Bobby Orr, in order to actually open the scoring, but then around the halfway point of the period, on the power play, Frank anchors Mr. Hockey commands the wheel, and Delvecchio just sails upstream home. The game is tied. And with the first period counting down, Ronnie Harris to Gordie Howe, who feeds it perfectly to Frank Mahovlich. The Wings lead 2-1 after one. Stemkowski and Lawson made it 4-1. Hodge cut the lead in half. It was 4-2 after 2 for the Wings. Stemkowski made it 5-2. The Wings fell apart, however, as goals by Busick, Espo, and Hodge tied the game. The energy out of the Olympia had just been sucked right out of the building as the game is now tied 5-5. Enter our hero. 23 seconds later, Bond gets it to Gordie, who feeds Frank again. He parks it home. The Wings lead 6-5, and the Olympia erupts, shaking to its very core. And the Wings are clinging to the lead, and the game is counting down as the Bruins press for the equalizer. Bond clears it to Delvecchio, who sees Frank empty netter. Hat trick for Frank Mahovlich, his first as a Red Wing, the 7th of his career. A 4.9 is named first star of the game as the fans in Detroit cheer loudly for their new hero. Frank Mahovlich is already making his presence felt in Detroit. And hey, Frank had a pretty damn good November. 6 goals, 8 points, 13 games, a monster plus 10. Big performances included a goal and a helper over the Stars in a win, and then 2 goals against the defending Stanley Cup champion Habs in a tie. The Red Wings were looking better than last year, but they still need to find some winning consistency. Now, Frank did, however, go into a 6-game scoring drought, but wasn't playing overly bad otherwise. In December, he was doing what he does best, performing big. He broke his drought with an assist in a dominant win over the Penguins 7-2, then scored a goal against the Rangers in another win, and then on the 8th had a huge night against the Rangers with another win, a goal and 2 helper for 3 points. His goal was the game winner. He had a goal in a loss to the Kings, 3 games later in a win over the Stars. Delvecchio, Unger, and Howe were each recipients of Frank's 3 assists that night. Oh man. Frank scored a goal in Toronto, but the resurgent Leafs down the Wings 8-3. Frank then had a goal and an assist at home against Toronto, where the Wings scored a thrilling 3-2 win. After scoring an assist in a tie with the Flyers on the 27th, on New Year's Eve against the Stars, another hat trick, a natural hat trick at that. All 3 goals assisted by Delvecchio and 2 from Howe. This line was something special. 16 points, 16 games in the month of December. Then began January with back-to-back losses, however, to the Blues and Hawks, but then the Wings went on a 6-game winning streak, and our hero was playing his heart out. Some of the best hockey of his career. It started with assisting on Gordie Howe's game winner in a win over the Penguins, then reaching the 20th goal of the year in a win over the LA Kings. The 10th time Frank reaches that mark. He scored a goal against the Rangers in the 3rd in a win, and then against the Seals. Count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4 goals. The first time since December 11th, 1960. Frank has scored 4 goals in a game, giving him his 3rd hat trick of the year. Oh my goodness, the Detroit Olympia went insane for him as he was announced the first star of the game. Then he scored a goal in a 4-0 shutout win over Montreal. The streak was completed against Pittsburgh, where Frank went pointless, but either way, it helped him win. The wins came to an end, but they went unbeaten in their 7th straight game in a tie with Toronto, where Frank would net a goal. After a loss to the Flyers, it was time to get ready for the NHL All-Star Game. The All-Star Game would undertake a new format, however, where it was no longer the Cup champions taking on the All-Stars. It was now East versus West. For Frank, this is his 10th All-Star Game, and 10th consecutive as well, as the festivities would take place in Montreal at the Forum on January 21st. Teammate Gordie Howe was joining him, and for Gordie, this was his 20th All-Star Game. Wow. The West led 1-0 as time was ticking down in the first period, but then Stapleton of the Hawks and Russo of the Habs set up Red Wing Frank to tie the game 1-1 after 1. The West led 2-1 in the 3rd. Rod Gilbert of New York, Ted Harris, whatever his name is this week for the Habs, set up Francis Mahovlich for a 2nd goal of the game. The game ended in a 3-3 tie, and for the 2nd time in his career, Frank Mahovlich was the NHL All-Star Game MVP and became the first player in NHL history to win the award a 2nd time. The Red Wings returned to action 2 days later against the Bruins at home and fought to a 2-2 tie. Both goals scored by, who else? Frank Mahovlich, and was named first star of the game. And the very next game against the Seals, Frank had a goal and assist in a 5-3 win, scored his 30th goal this season, marking the 5th time he's reached that mark. Scored a goal against Toronto after that and finished the month with 12 goals, adding 2 assists for 14 points. Oh, the Wings are flying high. However, after a 4-game drought, Frank got things going again as February progressed. On the 6th, a goal and an assist in a dominant win over the Hawks. Then, after scoring a goal against them in the next game in another win, he had another epic game and another hat trick. On his 4th of the year, a 5-0 win, he was in on all 5 goals as he added an assist in a win over the Kings, lighting up poor young Jerry Desjardins. He later had a goal and assist in a win over the Pens and scored 2 goals in a 9-1 thrashing of the Flyers on the 23rd. And in total, 8 goals, 5 assists, 13 points in 14 games, and a monster plus 12 for February. And hey, going into March, it was looking pretty good for the Red Wings. They had 69 points and were clinging on to the 4th and final playoff spot in the East. But Frank's former team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and for that matter Chicago, were still close enough to catch them for that final spot. So Detroit must go on winning mode. And it started very well. A goal and 2 helpers for 3 points against the Stars, and Frank scored his 40th goal of the year, the first time since his epic 48-goal season in 1960-61. He has reached that milestone, the 2nd time in his career. Oh man, and then scored 2 goals in a huge win over the Habs. Hey, they want the playoffs. The Tigers had just won the World Series that fall. The sports fans in Detroit want to see the Wings return to glory. And yeah, to hell with the Pistons, and at least the Lions had Alex Karras. But anyway, Frank got an assist in a tie against Boston. The Wings lost in here, but roared back against Boston, with Frank having 2 assists. But the Wings were in danger. He needs to bring his A game further on in the final 8 games of the season, as the Leafs are now tied with the Wings for 76 points, but the Wings have more wins, so they still hold that 4th and final spot, but barely. The thing is, the Wings, if they go on a hot streak, could even catch the Rangers for 3rd place. And hey, good news! Frank Mahovlich plays like a beast in the final 8 games of the season. The bad news, the Red Wings don't. They managed to go 0-6-2 in the final 8 games of the season. Frank did what he could. In the 8 games, he would have 7 goals, 5 assists for 12 points. He was, however, a -2, but that's not overly terrible. He had 2 goals and 2 assists for a big 4-point night against the Rangers. A goal and assist where they had to fight to tie Oakland. Yes, tie Oakland in 1969. That's worse than tying or losing to the Nordiques in 1991. Well, maybe not. A goal against the Kings, a goal against the Leafs, and then on March 27th against Toronto, despite another loss, scored his 48th goal of the season, tying his career best. Oh, but wait, there's more. He also broke Gordie Howe's team record of 47 in a season for the Red Wings, set back in 1951-52. He then had an assist in a tie with Chicago. And in the final game of the season, he had a goal and a helper, and he set a new career high with 49 goals, just one shy of 50. But either way, a monster accomplishment, setting the new club record. And indeed, Frank Mahovlich's 49 goals in a year was tremendous. The year he had in general was incredible, but the Wings allowed 34 goals in those final 8 games. That's 4.25 goals a game. They barely scored above 2.5. The top dogs, Frank, Gordie, and Alex, they played well, but their defense and goaltenders fell apart, as did the likes of Gary Unger, who had a breakout year, and an injury to Pete Stemkowski certainly didn't help. The Wings finished 33-31-12 for 78 points, a big improvement over the year prior, 5th in the East, and indeed, however, missed the playoffs for the 3rd straight year. And for Frank, it's his 2nd straight and 3rd overall year missing the postseason. Frank Mahovlich had 49 goals and 29 assists for 78 points in 76 games. Unbelievable. Well, hey, that line with he and Gordie Howe and Alex Delvecchio, that was utterly ridiculously good. Yes, Gordie assists on 28. Yes, 28 of Frank's 49 goals. My goodness. And what did Frank do in return, you ask? Well, he set up Gordie 15 times, meaning more than half of Frank's assists were to Gordie Howe. Overall, the two were together to produce 48, count them, 48 goals one way or another, while he and Delvecchio teamed for 34 4, including 7 assist collaborations. Frank also worked very well with former Leaf teammate defenseman Bon and Douglas, as well as the Red Wing star blue liner Gary Bergman. Frank, for the first time since the 1962-63 season and the 4th time in his career, made the top 10 in league scorers. His 78 points was tied for 10th in the league with Rangers superstar Jean Rattel. His 49 goals was tied for Phil Esposito as the 2nd best in the league, as Bobby Hull led the league with a new NHL record of 58. But look at this, teammate Alex Delvecchio, who is nearing 38 years old, was 7th in scoring. And Gordie Howe, 40 years old, nearly 41, had his first, yes, can you believe this? This was actually his first 100-point season. He finished 3rd in league scoring. Talk about helping each other out. Talk about teamwork. And for the first time since 1961, and the 2nd time in his career, Frank Mahovlich led the league in even strength goals with 42. That's 5 ahead, the closest to him, Phil Esposito and teammate Gordie Howe had 35. In total, Frank has finished the top 10 in this category now 7 times in his career. And in the 2nd year of plus-minus being an official NHL stat, Frank Mahovlich's insane plus 44 was tied for 5th best in the league, a 3-way tie actually with teammate Gary Bergman and Dallas Smith of the Bruins. Frank finished just a notch below teammate Gordie Howe at 4th. Delvecchio made the top 10 list at 8th. And for the first time in 3 seasons, and for the 5th time in his career, and his first time as a Red Wing, he is voted a 2nd-team All-Star. And again, combined with his first-team selections, he now sits at 7 total end-of-year All-Star team selections in his career. Frank has new life, and more importantly, new value in Detroit. Well, hey, Frank's first full season in Detroit was a monster success in terms of individual prowess. Despite the playoff heartbreak, and by not getting there, of course that is, he was playing at a level that he hadn't been seen in years. Some say it might have been one of the best years of his career. But either way, Frank was showing his determination that made him a star in Toronto in the first place. And the fans of Detroit loved him for it. And he seemed to give the fans of the organization some hope. Career highs in goals, setting a team record to boot with it, All-Star Game MVP for a 2nd time, 2nd-team All-Star, back to excelling with his dominance on even strength. At 31 years old, Frank Mahovlich is in the prime of his career. So now Frank is about to enter season lucky number 13, and there are a few questions that do surround the Red Wings of what will happen going forward. Frank did receive a little bit of bad news as his brother Pete, who the Red Wings felt wasn't progressing, was traded to Montreal. Despite last season's late collapse, the stars of this club are motivated, but also Frank now has that pressure of following one of the best seasons of his career and doing it with a team that wasn't even near as good as Toronto was nearly a decade prior. But he seems to have found himself at his best with Howe and Delvecchio, and this question mark of a Detroit squad. But they were about to get another huge boost on defense once again, and once again, it was going to be one of Frank's old pals from Toronto, 3-time All-Star Carl Brewer, for the first time in 4 years will play in the NHL. As again, part of the trade that sent Frank to the Wings, Brewer's rights were also dealt to the team if you recall. However, Carl has been gone for a while, and he can still bring a winning formula to the blue line along with Bon. I mean, on top of the 3 Stanley Cups he won in Toronto, since he's been gone from the NHL, he won a bronze medal at the World Hockey Championships for Canada in 1967, won the IHL's Turner Cup in Muskegon, and a very successful tenure playing pro hockey in Finland, one of the first North American stars to actually play over in that country. This looks like the complete team Sid Abel wanted to put together in order to rebound from these lean few years. And actually, Abel will be thrust back to going behind the bench again as Bill Gadsby would resign just a couple of games of this season. But things are looking promising in the Motor City. And he starts off the season with a home win over his former club, leading them to a 3-1 victory with a goal and an assist over the Leafs, yes, including the game winner. Frank would then score another game winner, this time over Chicago the very next game. He did battle an injury, just a minor one, however, after a loss to Minnesota and only missed 2 games, but would notch 2 assists over the Kings on the 29th, and the Red Wings, hey, they were off to a good start. Frank had 2 assists in a tight win over the Penguins, including set up Gordie Howe's game winner as the season commenced. And after another goal in the next game against the Penguins, he had 2 assists in a loss to the 2-time West Division champions, the St. Louis Blues. He would go pointless in the next 3 games and struggle in a couple of them. He broke that skid, however, with an assist and a tie with the Stars. And then down 4-0 to the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion Montreal Canadiens, Frank scored a hat trick in the second period, the 10th of his career, as the Wings battled back to tie the Habs 5-5. Lost to Toronto, however, and had a tie with Philly. They were on a 6-game winless skid, but then, against the Kings, Frank had 2 goals, a helper for 3 points, and a 5-1 win. They would then beat Chicago and lose to Oakland, really, in 1960. Now forget it. At the end of the month, well, either way, 12 points, 13 games in November. Frank was staying strong in December. 7 goals, 5 assists for another 12 points in 13 games. 2 goals in a tie with Boston on the 4th. In the very next game, a goal and a helper in a dominant win over the Blues. 2 goals and an assist in a convincing win over the Montreal Canadiens. And on New Year's Eve, as we're ready to ring in the new decade of the 1970s, had 2 assists, both to Delvecchio, and a dominant win over the Bruins 5-1. This Wings team is starting to look like the real deal. And Frank rang in the 1970s in style on January 3rd, as he had a goal on young Bernie Parent of the Flyers, and then assisted on all 3 of Alex Delvecchio's goals, as the veteran had a hat trick. And the other line mate, of course, Gordie Howe had 4 assists, as all of them worked together to produce the same 4 goals in a 6-1 win in Philly. The top line made all 3 stars, with our hero scoring the second. Oh, wow. 4 games later at home against the Flyers, the top line was the game 3 stars again, only this time in a tighter 5-3 win. Frank winning 3rd star honors with his 2 goals. This time, the victim in net was Doug Favell, while his line mates each had 3 points, and the Red Wings were causing red fever across Michigan once again. And now we're ready for the NHL All-Star Game. He'll play in his 11th All-Star Game and is joined by Gordie Howe playing, oh my goodness, in his 21st. Carl Brewer plays in his 4th, as he is having a big comeback season. The game also featured former Leaf teammates Ron Ellis and Dave Keon. Frank went pointless in this one, but the East still beat the West 4-1. And then Frank would have 11 points in 11 games in January, but in February, Frank wasn't overly productive with just 6 points in 14 games, but still a +2 and scored a game winner in Toronto over the Leafs in a 7-5 win. But then March into April, oh, this was Frank's month all the way. He scored a goal in a win over the Penguins, and then in a game against the Stars, he scored the tying goal to keep the 2-2 tie. Then notched 2 goals at his old stomping ground, Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, reaching the 30-goal mark yet again and beating the Leafs. And then in the very next game, 2 goals and an assist against the big bad Bruins in a huge 5-5 tie. 5 points in 2 games. 2 games later against the Stars, he scored a goal on the Gumper and helped Gordie and Gary score goals, a 3-point night. And on March 28th, in another 5-5 tie with Boston, he scored a goal on Eddie Johnston, then 3 assists, Gordie, Alex, and Gary. Oh yeah, 4-point night. And then he had an assist over Boston the next game. Then he made an April Fool of Chicago with 2 goals in a win, a goal and a helper in a win over the Leafs. He ended the year with 2 assists against the Rangers in a dominant win, and 1 goal in their loss to the Rangers to end the season. He ended the whole year on a 6-game point streak, 5 goals, 7 assists for 12 points, 2 points a game. Overall in the final month and a bit of the season, 12 goals, 10 assists, 22 points, a major +11, all in 17 games. And guess what? In the end, the Detroit Red Wings of 1969-70. 40 wins, 21 losses, 15 ties, 95 points. 3rd place in a very tight Eastern Division. Oh boy, and the Wings are headed to the postseason, and the Wings can say it for the first time since their Cup appearance in 1966. Frank can say it for the first time since his Cup win in 1967. It's now playoff time. And awaiting the Red Wings in this East quarterfinal is the Chicago Blackhawks. Frank hasn't played in the postseason since expansion, so now with 2 divisions, there are 2 rounds in each one to decide who will be the Stanley Cup finalist. After missing the playoffs the year prior, the Hawks were hungry to regain success. They finished with a record of 45, 22, and 9 for 99 points that gave them their best year in franchise history, 1st place in the East, and 1st place overall in the entire league. Head-to-head, the season series was split right down the middle, 4 wins each for the Hawks and the Red Wings. And in Chicago, Billy Ray was still their bench boss, and hey, had this team focused and ready. And while a lot has changed since Frank has faced them the last time in the playoffs, certain elements remain the same, and the big same thing is, of course, their 2-star forwards, and why not, because they're still awesome. Stan Mikita, in his 11th season, 86 points, which was 3rd best in the league, came in 4th for Hart Trophy voting, led the league in even strength goals, and was also a second-team All-Star once again. Bobby Hull, despite missing 15 games, scored 38 goals and registered 67 points in 61 games, a first-team All-Star for a 9th time, and 4th in Lady Byng Trophy voting. The Hawks saw a new rising star in Pitt Martin, who was a former Red Wing. He was mainly, a third-line role player and was still effective for the teams he played for, and had a couple decent scoring seasons in Boston before coming to Chicago and exploding. 30 goals, 33 assists, 63 points. He won the Bill Masterton Trophy for perseverance and dedication, and even snagged a couple votes for the Hart Trophy. Also on the team, you had Bobby Hull's younger brother Dennis still playing well. They had Jim Pappin, yes, Frank's old teammate in Toronto, who he helped try to bring along in his early years, but the Leafs gave up on him as well, and he just had a 28-goal season. Also on the Hawks, they had Lou Angotti, Cliff Coral, Chico Mackey, Jerry Pinder, and 18-year veteran Eric Nestorenko. A lot of great character players to round out that forward core. On the defense, they had a hungry young tiger in the vein of rookie Keith Magnuson. No nonsense, bad to the bone and to the teeth and beyond, which, some of those teeth he'd often lose. But he had a great rookie season with 24 assists, was the 5th best in the league with a plus 38, and led the league in penalty minutes, and was a finalist for the Calder Trophy as the league's top rookie. Joining him on the blue line was star defender Pat Stapleton, Doug Jarrett, Doug Mons, and Gilles Marat. But there's a good reason why Keith didn't win Rookie of the Year. That's because his teammate and new star goaltender Tony Esposito, yes, younger brother of Boston All-Star Phil Esposito, had an incredible year. 38, 17, and 9, a 2.17 goals against average, 932 save percentage. Those numbers are beyond phenomenal as is, but 15 shutouts. This is a rookie. And it's a modern post-expansion record that still stands to this day. So, of course, he won the Calder Trophy as the league's top rookie, obtained the Vezina Trophy, and was a first-team All-Star. And, he was a runner-up for the Hart Trophy as league MVP. Again, this is a rookie. However, I emphasize on that for a reason, because that's something the Wings could expose, as rookie goalies often falter in the playoffs, as history has shown. But either way, here we go. The Red Wings and our hero in the playoffs. Game 1 in Chicago, it's not good. Frank does not register a single shot, and the Blackhawks take it 4-2. Game 2, it looked good early as Stemkowski scored a shorthanded goal, but the Hawks tied at 137 later. Frank is being contained out there very heavily, as he's barely been a blip on the radar screen so far early in this series. Just one shot on goal, and Tony O is insane in net. Smart and Pinder do the Wings in with a 4-2 win and 2-0 series deficit for our hero and his boys. Oh no. Game 3 at the Olympia, the Red Wings are trying hard to get back into this thing, but it's another miserable outing for Frank. They've been borrowed Tony O, but he gets the better of them. It's another 4-2 win for the Hawks, as Bobby Hull was unstoppable in on all 4 goals. The Wings are on the verge of being swept, and yeah, that's what happened. Another 4-2 win for the Hawks. Mikita was the star of this game. Frank was abysmal, -3 and just 2 shots. The Red Wings' dream season became their worst nightmare, swept out, losing all games 4-2, I might add. And Frank was the worst he'd ever been in a playoff series. Pointless and an atrocious -6. Only Wayne Connolly was worse than that in regard. And the Hawks were all over Frank, and when he did break free, nothing came of it. Just a series and a postseason I'm sure he'd like to forget. The Hawks, however, would get swept in the next round themselves at the hands of the eventual Stanley Cup champion, Boston Bruins. In the regular season, Frank Mahovlich had 38 goals, 32 assists for 70 points in 74 games. Another great year. And the superstar line is what helped him strike gold once again. And he, Delvecchio, and Howard just putting on a show out there. This time it was Delvecchio, however, who had the best numbers with our hero, setting him up 20 times for goals. Just above half of Frank's goals came courtesy of Alex Delvecchio. He returned the favor, setting him up 12 times. All but 9 of Delvecchio's goals were courtesy of Frank Mahovlich that year. He and Alex also collaborated on 9 assists together. Oh my goodness, 41 different goals working together. And hey, Gordie was still ever present. Pete has set up Gordie 12 times as well, and together they produced 38 goals. To top it off, Frank and his old pal Carl Brewer still worked some magic together, and was at times often shifted with Gary Younger and Wayne Connolly to success. Frank finished in the top 10 among league scorers for the second straight year and for the 5th time in his career. His 70 points put him in a three-way tie for 10th with Dave Ballin of the Rangers and John McKenzie of the Bruins, and finished just 1 point behind teammate Gordie Howe, who finished 9th in the league. Frank's 38 goals tied Bobby Hull for 4th best in the NHL. And once again, Frank Mahovlich is among the top 10 in even-strength goal leaders. He scored 23 on an even-playing surface, tied for 9th with Montreal's Mikey Redmond, a name you'll be hearing in part 3 of our series, trust me. As teammate Gary Younger finished 2nd in the league with 30, and former Leafs teammate Ron Ellis had 28. And, hey now, for the 5th time in his career, for the first time since 1966, he finished in the top 10 among power play goal scorers, this time in a three-way tie for 3rd, with 14 extra man markers, tied with Bruins superstar John Busick and North Stars all-star Danny Grant. Teammate Gary Younger finished tied for 8th best with 12. And once again, Frank Mahovlich, a team all-star, named to the 2nd all-star team for the 6th time, now giving him 8 in total in terms of end-of-year all-star selections, showing he will not stop being one of the best in the game and is showing completely no signs of slowing down. And hey, the reunion with Carl Brewer pays off even further. Brewer gets his 3rd second team all-star selection and 4th overall team all-star selection of his career. Well, Frank's 2nd full season in Detroit is another successful one, as his success with 2 fellow legends in Howe and Delvecchio were key in getting the Wings one of their best regular seasons ever and into the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. This Wing team seemed onward and upward despite the heartbreak of being swept out in the opening round, and Frank had a good thing going in the Motor City. He was playing some of the best hockey of his career as he's getting older, aging like a fine wine in terms of professional athletes. But just as fast as his time in Detroit would be oh so glorious, it would be oh so horrendous even quicker. As the city of Detroit and its great hockey fans are in for something they never bargained for, and that is known as the era of the darkness with Harkness. But that is going to do it for part 2 of our look at the great Frank Mahovlich. His time in Detroit, well, it's not quite done yet, but the abruptness of his short yet memorable era there is quite a story to tell. So until then, please like and share the video, and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see ya!